what's the word I'm thinking of?
Murderous.
It's not. It's like it's not like, you don't want to say immersive, but it's visceral is probably a bit too much of a big word. It's like, I'm thinking engaging, I suppose.
Tell us what you really think of the backers.
I suppose engaging is the word, right? Like, you're going to get a much more like engaging
You hear this?
experience.
He doesn't think you know the word visceral, people.
Well, it's a lot of syllables for a bloke from Coventry. We have a 2-syllable cat where I'm from.
As the Pyro star system is lawless, this means that combat can break out anywhere. Social spaces can turn into combat spaces in the blink of an eye.
The main experience we're trying to build is something that feels a bit more like wild and not the typical thing that you've seen in Stanton. So the themes are a bit more chaotic than you'd expect. So for example, if you're shopping and then someone decides to take a firefight with you because they think your armor's cool and they want it, you can jump over that kiosk, sit behind that cover and return fire. So you're basically turning this shopping mall, which you were at previously, into a combat zone.
These spaces were built modularly with various different overlays that had to stitch together, but also make sure that it accounted for a fair combat fight and easy navigation for both vehicles and any other light elements that you want to be able to bring to these places. As for the trade posts, because of their ever-shifting inventory of things they could sell, could buy, things being on display, this changes the layout of the trade post itself.
Taking everyday objects in the trading post, like weapon terminals, something that you would purchase, would then, as soon as a fight is initiated, that becomes cover. You would be using these things to help yourself to not get shot by the enemy, essentially.
So you could be ducking behind cover behind a ship component that you want to purchase for your ship later, but first you've got to take care of this rival gang attacking you. Then afterwards you can decide, hey, I need to grab a multi-tool for this other salvage mission I need to go to. So after the firefight is finished, you go to the counter, pick up your multi-tool with a salvage component, pay for it, chip's done, and off you head out.
Taking what we've learned and these setups from Squadron 42 to Pyro, for example, NPCs having specific archetypes and having more specific classes, using things like defend areas and keeping NPCs in specific areas, Pyro, we're taking that to the next level where we're having more specific areas used for defenses and things like that and making areas stay in NPCs. We're also using something called schedule areas, which basically enforces NPCs to stay within a certain vicinity in combat. For 4.0, with server meshing, we expect higher server frame rates, so the idea is that you'll get a much more engaging AI experience. Let's talk about some of those classes. We have what we call our techie, which typically features light armor and SMGs, and they have more aggressive traits. So they're focused on getting close to you and flushing you out. Similar with our CQC class, which typically has shotguns, and obviously they have the much higher aggression version. You've seen us talk about traits at CitizenCon, and this is putting that work in the persistent universe and allowing us to create more dynamic situations. We're doing other things as well. For example, we're making NPCs hold up in rooms with shotguns and things like that. So when you have to eliminate a specific target and you're going into a room, those guys are specifically holding up there and you're kind of having a tug of war of them in close quarters environments versus them just kind of walking around the area. With our Juggernaut enemy, you'll have seen that that's the incredibly highly healthed LMG enemy, which ignores all shooting restrictions, can focus on pushing the player and shooting them out, and basically being that slow-moving target that walks towards you. Similar, including things like Copions into battle. One of the factions has pet Copions, and Copions fight alongside them, and that is fantastic because it gives you a different silhouette when you're fighting these factions. You know, you have to shoot a lot lower, you have to be a lot more conscious because they're a lot quicker than a human being, and just these nice little new additions to combat. We're integrating more things in terms of having people who are more aggressive, having different factions, having different accuracy profiles, and making the factions in Pyro feeling a bit more versatile and different to when you fight each other. These encounters are a lot more crafted and bespoke. Pyro is a system of conflict, and in there's many factions vying over control. When you arrive at Pyro, one of the first things you want to do is enlist one of the two primary factions. The Headhunters have more tiered structured armor, which you can acquire. The more higher tiered the armor is, the more tanky and resistant those enemies are.
As a headhunter, you might be hovering around the Sunset Mesa, trying to think of how you're going to get close by. You would land your ships under the cover of darkness. You're taking your ground vehicle to the outpost. You're then getting out, trying to sneak past the outer perimeter, and eventually navigating your way down to either the gas tanks or to the main landing pit itself, and finding the exact critical point that would break the entire operation at the scrapyard.
Citizens of Prosperity have much higher and deadly accuracy. They also have more civil weaponry versus criminal weaponry as well, so you'll see things more like bearings and so on and so forth, versus other more lawless factions which typically have things like Castak arms.
If you're aligned with the Citizens for Prosperity, you might be given a mission to go to Rustville and actually head down into the canyons and try to steal some of their scrap from their derelict ships in the base of the canyons. Because of Pyro 1's unique terrain where Rustville is located, you will need to get into your ground vehicle again, navigate through all the twisting canyons and ravines, and use your multi-tool to steal as much scrap as possible to end up sabotaging the unlimited supply of scrap that the Headhunters at Rustville have got.
So regardless if you side with Headhunters or Citizens of Prosperity, you will both be able to fight the Xeno Threat.
These hate everybody. They are operating out of Pyro 2, 3, and Pyro 6.
The Xeno Threat is more what you'd think of as a PMC in terms of how you fight them and how they behave. They're a lot more cautious, they're a lot more careful, they won't try rush you out of cover, they play a lot more defensively. And we can use our trait system to inform how they make combat decisions. So where you'd expect someone like the Headhunters to be a bit more, run at you, push you out, the Xeno Threat characters will be a lot more cautious and stationary and prefer to stay in cover and take long shots. And they'll have a much higher accuracy profile, but they'll shoot for much shorter durations, so they conserve their ammo a lot more.
A place we're going to fight Xeno Threat is at the Last Ditch settlement on Pyro 2. Last Ditch is another large, lawless settlement.
We have a town close by it, and then different mining operations between the village and the mining tower.
And it's kind of a callback to the history of the system, where there was once these mega corporations in Pyro that would do these large-scale mining operations.
It's a vital part in the Pyro ecosystem for these outlaw gangs to control. So we can also see here that there is fortifications, but they're mainly around the village from which these gangs operate.
But interestingly, it's almost built on 3 levels. There's like a main habitation area on top of this bluff, and then just down from that is the refinery area. And then right at the base of the super large mega mining structure is a small sort of extraction area in an old kind of quarry. Should make for some very interesting fights, especially as you move between those sort of 3 sub-locations within the larger location.
I hope that the player will get a sense of trying to stop Xeno Threat with their evil deeds.
Shadowfall is another Xeno Threat outpost. It's quite a large Xeno Threat outpost that lives in the shadow of this mountain on Pyro 3 and kind of just sits on the shore of this lake.
This location hits different. It's a location just like the outlaw locations, but we can feel that things have been turned up further. It is not only is it chaos, but it is now a structured chaos.
There's fire and there's these spiked barricades that make up the place around it.
Within the homestead location, we have a lot of elevated positions that the player will look to. We'll see that there is a lot of scaffolding build up, and it feels like a fortified position.
So in 3.23, we added sniper NPCs to the distribution centers. In 4.0, we're going further on that and adding specific watch nests and things like that to keep these snipers in. So you'll have to be careful and keep an eye on for these outposts and these high elevation where snipers could essentially hit you from. How we're validating combat is ensuring that the players can have a lot more stealthy approach, have a lot more overview of what their targets are doing and where they're going.
So you could use elevation to plan things out, such things as a comms tower, such things as cliff edges. You can basically survey over the trade post or the outpost itself. You could look at key things. Does it have automated weapon systems there? Does it have primary, secondary, and tertiary pathing to allow the player in?
It's all about defensive structures, about obstructing the player in order to get to its objective, with a lot of anti-air turrets littered around the location.
You are going to need to use your aerial support to take out these defensive measures so that you can even get people close to the location. Eventually, you can pull in your ground vehicles, drop off an elite squad. You can stealth through the scrapyard, you can stealth via the nearby lake, come through the derelict outpost section, finally clearing out Xeno Threat once and for all.
Well, until they come back.
From another outpost.
It's definitely a place that will just feel very hostile to the player. And you feel like this is a location that has a purpose within the universe and that it's important for these outlaw gangs to protect what they have going right here.
In 4.0, you can expect a lot more crafted, engaging combat experiences, with new archetypes, enemies using new weapons, fighting animals alongside humans, and all sorts of absolute crazy that you expect from Pyro.
Eradicate!
All right, Bosch.
Well, what more can I add? We always knew there'd be a lot of combat in Pyro, but with the addition of more AI archetypes from Squadron and the anticipated performance improvements generated by server meshing, we're hoping to deliver an experience that's more dangerous, engaging, and heck, I'm not from Coventry, so I can say it, visceral for our players. For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. Thanks for letting us share the people and process of game development with you, and we'll see you all here next week for a look at characters and creatures in 4.0.